says, "Hey Luke, I've been following your YouTube channel for a while and thanks for sharing the knowledge. I live in Brazil and I'm a graduate in instructional design. Here I face a challenge that I don't know is a problem only in Brazil or worldwide. Businesses here don't do needs analysis at all. ADDIE means die. The A and the D steps just simply don't exist. They give the solution for the instructional design to make a course out of it. My question: what's the best way to approach leaders that don't want an analysis or design steps? I'm asking this because it looks like Brazil is a decade late in the instructional design field, and maybe there is already a good approach to manage those situations. Thanks again." So, Tim, I'll let you take the first question. What do you say to this one?
Well, one of the first things that came to mind is that adage that when you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? That we tend to see a solution that fits our skill set. And it sounds like in this situation, this company maybe has instructional designers and trusts them. And so, they'll see a problem. They say, oh, we'll make a course to solve that problem. And so, that may be a thing. In some ways, that's a compliment, right? It's I know that you guys can solve problems, and here's a problem that we have. So, go solve it. But the other aspect I was thinking of this one is that as an ID, and I know you've talked about this before, as an ID, relationship management is a huge part of what we do. And so there is an aspect of it is my job when someone comes to me and says, hey, I've got this problem, here's how I want to solve it, that I will say, sure, let's pursue that path. But have you also considered this, or have you thought about this tool, or have you? So it's easy to make suggestions, and whenever possible, making those kind of suggestions really dig into why. What's the benefit of this other thing? Because if your company says they want a course on something, but you think like a job aid would solve the problem, or a simple YouTube video, then that's actually going to be cheaper for them, right? So you could say, hey, we could solve this same problem at a fifth the cost if we tried something like this. And that's going to get their attention, right? A fifth the cost, that's a good idea. So that's another thing too. If you have an idea, definitely present it as a suggestion or I really hate passive voice when I'm writing, but when I'm working with SMEs, that's how it is. Have you considered this? Or you might think about this, or I've seen other companies use this tool. And so you can always throw out those suggestions and always anchor it with a reason why it's going to be beneficial to them to think about that tool.
Now, when you were thinking about answering this, one of the things that I saw right away that I was just like, I don't think I actually agree with that, is that he was wondering if this was a Brazil problem or if it's an anywhere problem. I think it's an anywhere problem.
It's
Do you
an
think
anywhere
it's
problem.
Okay, yeah.
No, they're definitely not a decade behind a decade ago. If you had IDs, that was great,
Right, exactly. I know. It's just like so many of the people of the world are finally learning about who we are and what it is that we do now. So it's just like, no, I don't think that they are really far behind. And for the most part, Tim, I definitely agree with many of the things that you said. What actually came to mind was this idea about how instructional designers can be seen as order takers. And I know when I talked with Heidi Kirby a long time ago, and she came on the podcast, she was talking about how she was just like, you can't just like take L&D and assume like you can just go and order up a pizza and then to say that I want this and this and this and then like have it delivered to you.
Right.
Like, that's not how this works. There needs to be a lot
off the menu. Yeah.
Right, exactly. It's like, no, there needs to be a lot more pertaining to that. We are simply not just order takers here. So if I was in this person's shoes, I would actually have like two different strategies around how I would approach this. It definitely comes back to relationship management for either strategy that they do talk about. But what really comes to mind is, and I'm not sure if you remember this, Tim, like this quote that was back, I think it was like the quote was like back in 2019 or something. It was on LinkedIn everywhere. You couldn't escape it. But it was basically a conversation between a CFO and a CEO. And the CFO talks to the CEO and says, what happens if we invest in developing our people when they leave us? And the CEO says, well, what happens if they don't and they stay? And that's what this kind of reminds me of, is going to be like, what exactly are we doing here? Because we could get into some dangerous waters by not being able to properly conduct research and go through with these types of motions. And also at the same time, too, we can try to think about this as far as we're trying to highlight an example about what could go really well. So we have two potential strategies of like, what would be the dangers, then the pitfalls if we don't do things correctly, and also what can we actually make as like a champion example if we crush it and things go absolutely well. And to me, this depends upon the person who we're working with. So whether it's your boss, the subject matter expert, whoever it really is, I want to be able to know a little bit more about them and see what drives them just from having these conversations and really just being attentive and listening to exactly what really excites them, what makes them tick, what makes them kind of nervous. Because if you can use and highlight examples talking about, let's say, for highlighting the successes as far as for pertaining to doing everything the right way, and then showcasing about how the employees are incredibly happy, they leave positive reviews after reviews, the place gets voted as like #1 place to work because of culture and awesomeness, and the Glassdoor reviews are like off the charts and shows that the ROI is just incredible. Well, then we can go that way as far as for saying these solutions helped with what the L&D team did. Or you can do the opposite as far as we're saying, look at how these people did not do things correctly, and they just pitched idea after idea, and they went nowhere, basically seeing what sticks up against the wall, and now people hate it. The culture is abysmal. People are quitting. Lawsuits are flying out. So whatever would potentially make that person move in that right direction to try to get them for you to be able to actually go and pitch new ideas, conduct your real research, get your amount of time that you really do need, I would kind of try either one, potentially whatever might work. So that's what I was kind of thinking about when I read that question.
Yeah. And another thing to think about too is I'm sensing a little frustration on the questioner's part here, but maybe that just might be your role in the group. Having had multiple experiences, I've worked at a small community college, and I've worked at ASU, a very behemoth of a university. And one of the things that I've experienced is that just because you're not doing the A&D portions of ADDIE doesn't mean they're not being done somewhere. Oftentimes, especially in a much larger institution, by the time it gets to the ID, there have been focus groups and maybe even a year of meetings and things like that, doing these other kind of processes of deciding, is this where we want to invest and things like that. So I'm not saying that's exactly what's happening in your situation, but that could be what's happening in your situation. And there are those times where we are just the end of a line rather than the whole process.
So then to that point, what suggestions would you have for them to try to be able to get in the know, to meet those right people and to hear that information instead of getting it way at the end of the process, as far as for them being at the beginning of the process? Any steps you would advise from there?
That's networking, relationship building. It's still back to that first answer of make suggestions. Once people start seeing you as a person that has ideas and that has good suggestions and has good reasons for them, then you'll slowly get brought into those meetings earlier in the process.
Yeah, it's definitely networking. One of the things I should have actually warned you about, Tim, is that I ask a lot of questions. I'm asking questions that you didn't have prepared ahead of time, so I'm going to throw stuff at you. But it's because I really respect your opinion for how much you've been able to do in this field, so I'm always really curious about your insights. But that's the exact same thing I would have said about as far as for networking, as far as for really being able to also, one of the activities that I have some of my students do from leadership programs, which is really interesting, is trying to be able to create like a stakeholder map as far as we're seeing who in the company has the key decision, who is the person that talks to whom on lunch, who is the influencer. And sometimes they're actually people who you would never, ever guess. I can confidently tell you that if I have a question about how my organization runs, I don't go directly to the senior director of the blah, blah, blah. I actually start first with the administrator who I see in the morning as I'm walking by in the front desk and saying hi, because they know everyone. They talk to every person. They know every person's kid's names and their dog's name and who goes to. So it's that person has the knowledge. I want to become best friends with that person because then I can learn so much more. And then you can figure out those right stakeholders and whatnot. So, yeah. Yeah, that is one tip that I learned a while ago. So I think we got this question down.